I'm Mark Richman from Skeleton Key. My contact information is over there on the board. It's not in the slides, so if there's any questions I can answer afterwards or brainstorming you want to do, or just shoot the breeze, I'm more happy to meet with anybody or chat with anybody about this stuff. A reminder, this is not going to be a technical discussion. I'll probably repeat that several times. Let's go ahead and dive in. I want to leave plenty of time for conversations, and like my session yesterday, I think lots of you will have examples to share with each other that could be really useful and instructive. So you can call me Mark. I wear a lot of hats. I'm a dad. I run a team, Skeleton Key. I've been involved in a lot of different peer groups and other types of groups over the years that are really focused on measuring effectiveness of different kinds of businesses. I was in entrepreneurs organization for a while. I was part of an open book group of companies that share their books with their employees. You try to get everyone to think and act like owners. I've been in a FileMaker app dev business group since 2009 that actually was born out of DevCon and Engage. I was part of EO, which is an international organization, brings together companies of different businesses in non-competing groups to talk about things, and you start to realize that businesses are more alike than they are dissimilar, which most of you probably know, working with lots of people in the FileMaker space. And more recently in Vistage. We've also recently, as a company, adopted the entrepreneurial operating system called EOS, which has really, again, brought up this topic of scorecards and metrics and KPI. So it's a topic that I have no mastery in, but lots of experience and a lot of hard lessons learned, and I'm still learning all the time. I'm also a dad, and so we have versions of this stuff in my house, actually. We have, scorecards and scoreboards that kind of tell us, and they're not called that, but they keep us on top of whether our kids are doing what they're supposed to do, whether or not as a family we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. And it's not that formal and geeky at home. It's definitely positioned in a different way. When we get toward the end of the session, we start talking about individual metrics that matter to employees. I think you'll see where that connection comes in. So my objectives today, I want to make sure I really drive home why I think it's important to not get into the technical weeds. I have built tons of reports and charts in various solutions. FileMaker, BrightGauge, Autotask, HubSpot, on and on and on. We've probably got people who have worked with Power BI and Tableau. It's really easy to just start summarizing and reporting and slicing and dicing data without thinking about whether the end result of what you create is actually going to be of any use. I've walked into clients who had a Power BI dashboard with 50 widgets on it. And I was like, so what do you do with that information? And they're like, we see how we're doing or how we've been doing. And I'm like, so what does it tell you about how you're going to do? Or what you should do about those numbers? And they're like, and don't really know. Because it was real easy for that consultant to create all those widgets and reports without really thinking about their utility. So we want to focus on different kinds of metrics, a couple of simple examples. I'm sure several of you have other examples that I'd like you to share to kind of get people thinking about different ways you can use different kinds of indicators and KPIs. There's no bad ones. There's just the right ones for different kinds of scenarios and purposes. Ideally, then I want you to be able to predict which ones would be useful in which situations, right? So you can kind of think ahead as to what do we need here. And this isn't just, executing what your clients ask for. This means bringing to your client conversations or your work group conversations the willingness to say, I don't think that metric's going to be very useful. It might be interesting. We can go celebrate a win, but it's not going to help us do better next week. What would be a better metric? And sometimes it's not what you'd expect. So we'll do some comparison and contrasting and help you understand that as well. And then we're going to get into something that's a little more theoretical. It's something relatively recent to me. It's something I've been reading over a long period of time because it's pretty dense material. But this idea that some things just seem like they're immeasurable. And I'll share a book and an author and some ideas from his book, which I think are difficult to, they're very challenging and difficult to consume initially, but they can actually be extremely powerful if you can put the time in. They can not only help you sell solutions to your clients or convince decision makers in your organization that it's worthwhile investing in tools, but that actually some of the things that you're trying to help them improve, as elusive as they might seem to be, are actually less elusive than they might actually be. We'll also talk a little bit about just the personal side of this thing. Like, it's one thing to have a measure for the department or the company. It's another thing to have a measurement for an individual person working on a particular part of the business, and how you can engage people and come up with metrics that are actually meaningful to them that they can control. All right, so why non-technical? This is the hardest part, is what you should measure in the first place. And in fact, I think the reason that so many dashboards and reports are less useful than they could be is because people don't spend a lot of time thinking about what they could measure. They just kind of dive in and start summarizing and reporting on what data they have, right? In the most obvious and simple ways. I think it's natural to want to do that, to be able to aggregate, summarize, and compare information. It's really hard to slow down and think about what you should measure. A great example of this for my own team recently was that we wanted to come up with an executive team scorecard, skeleton key. And so we brainstormed into a spreadsheet, like all the different ideas we had for what might be possible and useful. And I think the way that our consultant positioned it for us is, what would you want to know on a weekly basis if a bottle came to the beach on the desert island you were stranded on to tell you whether the business was doing okay? You had 43 or something items on that list. And then we went back and we started reviewing them. We identified that most of them would tell us how the business had been doing, but very few of them were going to tell us how it was going to do in the future. So we would be on the desert island, like screaming and yelling and wishing we could do something to warn the business that they were running into a dangerous spot. But we didn't have that kind of metrics. All we had was they didn't do so good. I hope they do better when we get next week's bottle. Right? And we saw that happening repeatedly, actually, in the solutions we were building for clients too. Like, we were giving them reports of summarized data effectively, backwards-looking reports, but we weren't introducing a lot of the other types of metrics there are. And also, I'll cover all those. How you should measure it and how you should display it, the steps 2 and 3, you guys know how to do that. And there will be some challenges there when we talk about that complicated book at the end about things that seem really hard to measure and how you might actually be able to measure them after all. But that's where you get into the technical stuff. And in fact, the ease with which FileMaker and the platform lets us do that is one of the other reasons I think we slip down this slippery path, is that you see some data, there's really easy tools, we can quickly create things and share them with other people. We can ask AI to build a chart for us, like Ronnie showed, and it'll keep creating reports, but those charts may actually all be just telling us different versions of the past, and very few of them might be telling us other things we should know about our business. So you skip past step 1, you jump into step 2, you share them in step 3, and that's great, but are you giving yourselves and your clients the best valuable information that they could actually get from their data? The other piece of the problem is validation. You know, it's one thing to create, like, we created a bunch of metrics and we put a bunch of them in our scorecards, and then we started tracking them. And then there's this sort of sense of, what's the word I'm looking for? Something like they're precious, right? You don't want to discard a chart. You don't want to get rid of a report. The idea of actually not tracking a number you've been tracking for a while seems like verboten. Like, there's no way we can do that. But the reality is, if you're not looking at those, identifying whether they're useful to you or to your clients or to your teams or work groups, and then are willing to actually throw them away if they're not actually making anything change, then all they are is like a pat on the back, you know, kind of report. They'll tell you if you did okay or if you did well, and celebrate it, but they're really not very useful to the business. They're not helping the business improve, eliminate problems or waste, achieve new goals. And so you have to be willing to throw them away. And that is something that we've found, not just in the area of scorecards, but as a company. There's a lot of things we've been doing for a lot of time. Like, we've had a Monday morning huddle since 2009 as an open book company every Monday since 2000. We've had a monthly recap once a month, looking backwards at the previous month to talk about how that went in the previous quarter and so on, every month since 2009. And we are in the process now of, it's almost like sacred cow. Like, we're not going to have the monthly meeting anymore. We're going to have a quarterly meeting. We're going to review all 3 months. We'll send some reports out on the monthly date, but we're not going to talk about them because they're really looking backwards. We're going to focus on how did the quarter go and what are we going to do next quarter. And so we're changing things that we thought were set in stone. And I think that that's often true. Clients end up accumulating reports, accumulating charts, and they don't actually look at optimizing them over time. And as a result, I think it also creates a secondary effect, which is, are you already getting 12 charts? Are you already getting 13 reports? I don't want to burden you with another one, right? It's like, what's that song? Like, monkeys in the bed, like, one's got to get out for another one to get in, right? You have to be willing to set, maybe, we want the 10 best reports or the 5 best charts we can come up with. If these aren't cutting it, what can replace one of these that we have? And really allow yourself the freedom to say goodbye to something that's not working. All right, let's get into types. We'll start with the most common ones, leading and trailing indicators. So a leading indicator is something that should be telling you where you're going, give you a sense of your trajectory. You can't change the past, but if you have leading indicators in your reports and charts, you could actually potentially take action today that might change what this number looks like tomorrow. or whatever your interval for reporting is. They can help you forecast what's coming, allow preemptive actions, and basically give you, like a telescope, a bit of a preview. It may not be very precise, right? You look at a telescope, you look at a binoculars, you can see, but there's some distortion, you have some limited view. So there are some trade-offs there, but certainly can be very useful. Examples of leading indicators might be how many estimates your sales team are creating, or how many phone calls your salespeople are making. Those are often leading indicators about whether you're going to have enough opportunities in your pipeline and enough wins later to actually feed you and your family. Another might be how many hours of work are planned. Right? We were just talking about this in the hallway with Mike, that there's a difference between allocating your resources to a project and actually having work on that project planned and actionable for them to do. Right? So it's great. Joe shows up on Monday morning, he's ready to work on the project, and by 3 p.m, he can actually get started because all the prep work that needed to be done to make those issues ready to be actually developed wasn't done. Very different to say we're fully booked versus we're actually ready to work. Another would be for my kids. I brought this one home. When I look at my kids and see missed assignments, I can pretty much predict their grades are not going to be so good that semester. So we have, this is one of those scorecards for my kids. We have a 0 missed assignments policy. It's like whack-a-mole. Missed assignment pops up, drop what you're doing, get it, hand it in. I don't care if it's Friday and you want to get online and play Fortnite with your friends, that's got to go away. When I used to have a managed IT services department, the best scorecard we had was 12 numbers on a dashboard for our service coordinator, and they all had to be 0. And it was whack-a-mole all day long for her. It was just constantly refreshing on the wall. And when a 1 showed up, it was bright red. And if it turned into a 2, fire alarm bells were basically ringing in her head. She had to whack those down. They were things like tickets that hadn't been assigned to someone yet, priority 1 tickets that were more than an hour old, et cetera, et cetera. They were ways for her to see problems starting before they actually became crises. I'm going to stop there and actually ask, does anyone else have good examples they think of a leading indicator? We might disagree that it's a leading indicator that they'd want to share with everybody here. Sure.
Perhaps the burn down rates in the projects, how fast you are burning time or budgets.
Yep.
It's a good predictor. You can forecast if they're going to be either delayed in time or running over budgets.
That's right. Burn down's a great one. We created a app recently at Skeleton Key where after one issue is completed, we can project where the project will end. We assume that we're going to continue to work as efficiently or inefficiently, right, on that one issue. That's a version of burn down. And use that to kind of forecast where we think the project will end. So we can take intervention immediately. Why did that one issue go over? And of course, the more issues we accumulate and keep adjusting that burn down number, the more accurate that becomes, right? At the beginning, the telescope thinks the mountain's just a few meters back. And then, of course, as you get closer, you realize, oh, it's actually much further away than I thought or much closer than I thought. Someone else?
Past due receivables under cash flow.
Yeah. You can keep an eye on that past due. That seems like something that says past in it, right? That would seem like you're looking backwards. But the reality is that if you're not monitoring, a week monitor is days sales outstanding. We take how much we make each day. We divide it into our accounts receivable, and we're looking for how many days of the money we made is in other people's bank accounts, right? And if that number is going up for whatever reason, we're not getting our prepayments, our accounts receivables are being paid late, that starts to tell us we're going to have a cash flow crunch in the future, right? So it's an early warning sign. It's like that beeping sound you hear when your gas tank isn't empty, but it's going to be empty soon, right? It's an early warning. Sure.
Future revenue producing appointments for, we're like in orthodontic dental space. So one of the most leading indicators is exam appointments, which don't actually produce any revenue, but that's where they book the appointments that they're gonna. So practices like to see how many exams do I have over the next month, 3 months, whatever, scheduled already.
I love that one. I think that's great because one of my favorite indicators, and this will come up in my final slides, is what I consider indirect indicators of future performance. You know, if I change this thing over here, this other thing over here, there will be affected. They seem really unrelated, right? You almost could focus all your focus on like just get as many exam appointments as you can, but we don't have so much. Well, that's okay. But if it's not okay, it's going to have a tertiary effect somewhere else. All right. We'll have plenty of time. I'm going to go through this as quick as I can, and we can circle back to any of these slides. Trailing indicators let you talk about the past and learn from it, right? So they're not going to look forward, but they can let you evaluate or analyze what's happened. They're retrospective metrics, to use a natural term. Give you a chance to say, like, why did that happen? How did that happen? what could we possibly do as an intervention in the future that would allow us to have an improvement in our trailing indicator? And these are not as discrete as I make them sound. In fact, typically you can, use one, take a trailing indicator and analyze it and break it down to kind of figure out what were the leading indicators that might have influenced it. And often one gives birth to the other. So they're not truly independent. But these are very much looking backwards, right? They're like taking the microscope afterwards and doing a post-mortem or doing some kind of audit of what's going on. So examples of this would be looking after the fact of how many deals you won to get a percentage of your win rate. Well, that's very useful in combination with the leading indicator about how many deals you have to kind of estimate how many you will actually win. But if you're just looking at how many you won, that's just a trailing indicator in and of itself. Or looking at how much money you earned in a particular period, or how much work you completed in a particular period. This is the kind of indicator I think we use a lot. This is the taking the data out of the database and summarizing it, reporting on it. And then, I'll admit that for the first 5 or 4 years of my business, we looked at a trailing indicator report of how much work we did and who did it and how much time we gave away and how much time we spent traveling and et cetera, et cetera. We saw the underperformance as a young company in 2002, 2004. That's really interesting. And then we put that piece of paper away and we went back and we got the very same report the next week and the very same report the next week. So we had the data, we just didn't do analysis and we weren't using any leading indicators to tell us that we were going to have a bad Monday other than the fact that we had a stack of really bad Mondays behind us. So examples I wrote here include also looking at your completed work. In my case, looking at my kids' grades because they didn't listen to our advice. They didn't study, they didn't do their missing assignments. This is the evidence at the end that you can look at and see what has actually happened. And then you can maybe analyze why it happened and what you might be able to do. This is what led us to our missing assignment metric in my family. We noticed our kids' grades weren't where they could be. We're not really crazy about grades, but at least want them to learn. And then we went back and we're like, oh, you had 8 missing assignments. How about we go for 0? 0 is the number. And anything more than 0, they have a week to get them in. Let's make sure we fix that. And proud to say, I think we've gone down to an average of 1 or less per kid per semester. Grades have been better. We don't spend a lot of time talking to teachers. Great. So let's compare and contrast them. Time frame, both look at something today, but leading indicators focus on the future. Trailing indicators analyze the past. They both allow for corrective actions, but leading indicators let you correct things now to change things tomorrow or even this afternoon. Trailing indicators let you change things whatever the next interval of period will be of reporting. And only if you do the analysis and actually take action. My favorite action coming out of a trailing indicator is to give birth to a leading indicator that might be more useful. In the long run, you can get rid of the trailing indicators. They should take care of themselves. And they both improve your predictive skills, right? They both let you learn how to anticipate things, get better at anticipating and forecasting what might happen based on the evidence you're seeing today. They also teach you to be good at analysis and evaluation and do that kind of review of whether or not the metrics you have or the data that you have is actually serving a purpose to kind of spawn some kind of action. So I think they're both very useful. It's not an either or. I'm going to keep repeating that. I think all of the different kinds of metrics that we're going to talk about, different categories of metrics are good. Both affect strategic decisions and planning. Both affect performance. They provide different kinds of insights. Combining them can be super powerful. And like I said earlier, learning how to analyze them in comparison to one another can often help you create the missing piece that would really be more valuable. I didn't stop and ask if anyone has examples of trailing indicators because that seems redundant. We all do. Talk about real-time data versus data trends. So real-time data, yes?
Real quick, just going back to your example of those earlier years, where you're looking at those trailing indicators and you weren't really taking action. Like what do you feel like you should have done, or what did you end up doing to consume those trailing indicators to make leading or to look forward and say, okay, this is how we're going to change that in the future?
So what we did as a company may not be what everybody else here would do. We started asking lots of questions. First of all, we got a consultant who was an open book consultant who I'd met through networking, and started sharing some of that information with him and having conversations about what might be the root cause for those results. at that time, back in 2004, 2005, 2006. Other than the fact that I didn't know how to run a business at all, I'm still learning that today. It was that we were hiring too many people and we were giving away too many discounts. So we were letting clients, for whatever reason, get a discount for buying things in advance and then sometimes paying us late anyway, right? Buying a block of hours and then paying the bill net 30 doesn't quite make sense. So it led to changes in the way that we hired, pace at which we hired, better focus on work assigned to our employees than work they were doing. This is obviously 20 years ago, so early days of Skeleton Key. Also, we were an IT company, so it was a different kind of work we were doing. So it led to really just, I think, a change. Focus on planning, focus on hiring, change in pricing and discount policies. The major change I think we made, one of our metrics we were noticing is that I was playing chicken with payroll, every single payroll for about 4 or 5 years. Partly that had to do because I had under-borrowed to start the business and didn't have enough of a cash basis to begin the business. Part of it had to do with the fact that I was letting our clients pay us at a ridiculously slow pace, right? And so I became instantly overnight a prepay by default company. And now I still had a certain percentage. Instead of having 90% of our clients pay us late, I had 90% of our clients paying us up front, and I only had 10% of them paying us late. My cash flow problems went away overnight. And interestingly, flash forward about 15 years, I was talking with a $12 million scanning and printing company that did all this work for hospitals. He had a cash flow crunch. He had these big clients who paid net 120 or something ridiculous, constantly playing chicken with payroll and cash flow, huge staff, huge warehouse. I told him that story. He went back, default language in his contract policy to net zero terms, found some of our big clients, negotiated that to net 30 or net 15 or half up front, half on net 120, changed his cash flow instantly overnight. And to him, it was like me, it felt like everyone was going to fire us. If I changed a policy like that, if I started measuring my people on planned work versus actual work, that something was like the sky was going to fall. And it didn't. But it required that willingness to throw out an old policy and take it.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, sure. I'm kind of wired that way, for better or worse. All right. Real-time data. That's what's happening right now. That's the IoT. That was the previous AI, right? Like super exciting stuff, IoT. Well, we've heard that session for a while. Real-time data can be really useful, but it can also be overwhelming. It can also be really expensive to set up. I was talking last night around the fire to someone who talked about the exchange of moving their data to a system and thinking that they offloaded a bunch of data, but what they actually inherited were logs about the movement of the data to another system that were almost the same size as the data that they moved, right? There was this sort of, logs are great. They let you to do this forensic review of things, but they can actually be really painful to store and host and manage. We've had servers back in the IT days go down because the logs ate up all the disk space. No one saw them in any of the places that people look for files. It was just eating up disk space in the background. So real-time data streams like the stock market or like the trains, like when you go to the train station, can be really useful information if you have them properly tuned, properly configured, and can actually take action on them. But that's a very challenging thing, and it could be a very expensive thing to do, to set them up and get them to work properly. So examples of real-time data collection might be a little less technical than IoT. They still might require a certain amount of data capture. So if you can, though, actually be monitoring machinery, for example, in a manufacturing environment, you might be able to predict variances that indicate that that system is out of alignment and is actually going to fail in some way. It's been happening in the hallways. The lights going up and down. Unless someone bumped into them.
That was me.
Oh, that's right. I'm not sure how to fix it. So we have a client who does manufacturing of airplane parts. They have massive lathes and mills, and they're working on this really expensive raw material. I think we walked in there one day, we were walking through and he was giving us a tour, and he pointed to this thing that looked maybe about half the size of the top of this podium. And it's a big, beautiful piece of, I think, titanium or aluminum, I forget. It was something, all these holes punched into it. And he said, that's a $25,000 piece of scrap. A $25,000 piece of scrap that all those holes had actually been drilled out of it. So that was all just shavings on the ground somewhere. And this entire piece was just going to be melted down and reused. and all the work and time and labor and machine time was just lost. And the reason for that was variances in the equipment that they were unable to manage because they were just writing them on a little piece of paper in tiny little scrawl, taking measurements if people were actually good at taking them, which would have indicated early on that this machine was having tiny fraction of a millimeter variances in its positioning that are eventually going to accumulate over time to make this part off spec. So no one really was at fault there other than they didn't have real-time data. They had something that was delayed by maybe an hour or a shift, and that was enough to cause a massive loss that they could have otherwise prevented. We obviously know real-time and logistics is really important. Several of us have probably implemented solutions with GPS connections or mapping that allows us to see where places are, and that can be very useful in terms of understanding whether things are going to get there on time or they need to be rerouted, or whether or not you're going to actually be able to produce what you need because the products will be in some time. And in production team, we used to have something called in transit. I think we've replaced it with some other tools, but it was a little FileMaker app that was basically a way for people to indicate to the moment if they had capacity. Something fell through, a meeting changed, I finished this sooner than I thought. I am available right now. And it was very visible, it was on the wall, other developers on the team could see it. And the concept was in real time, I could see who had capacity so that I could potentially pass something over to them. And that could change minute by minute, hour by hour. It was constantly changing. It was never the same when you looked at it twice. If it was, then we had a persistent underutilization on someone, or someone who was persistently overutilized. Maybe we could give some work to somebody else. But it was a way for that team, and it was a bunch of relatively junior developers, instead of having to literally raise their hand and get attention, to type something in and have it show up. So it was human-driven real-time data, but it spawned responses in the rest of the team because it was highly visible and projected on the wall where everybody could see it, kind of like that whack-a-mole example. That whack-a-mole example, even though that was a leading indicator, was actually real-time data coming out of a ticket system. So it was kind of a hybrid. Again, none of these are necessarily isolated examples. Anyone else doing anything with real-time data with a FileMaker solution?
Using hours worked against, the estimate for the project, estimated hours for the project, keeping an eye on how we're staying on budget, which can be tricky in a lot of ways, but got some basic metrics that we use.
Right, and so I think that same burn down kind of scope tracker we have does the same thing. As each hour is logged in the system, you could technically be monitoring that and seeing it. We actually have that whole burn down number percentage thing distilled into a tiny little infographic that's just goes from green to red, right? Just shades of green to blue to yellow, whatever it is. And the idea there is that you can just eyeball really quickly in real time. Is that project that was green a minute ago, and now suddenly, because someone entered a time entry, it's yellow. What's going on? Yeah.
We do real-time inventory tracking e-commerce sales and local sales and phone sales. So at any given time, a new sale has the quantity available, what's been already allocated for upcoming or pending orders.
Right. Okay. Bye.
Yeah, we do real-time tracking of a delivery platform that most people would compare to like FedEx or UPS, but it's custom made. But we actually feed that into just-in-time metrics of predicting like if the package load is going to be too much, so they can plan to get extra drivers. So it's a leading indicator of like real-time statistics that's used to predict just-in-time like staffing issues.
Right. These aren't easy examples. Go ahead, but they're useful.
We're going to have it for inventory of pharmaceutical products that we're manufacturing about the customers, but also going to be tracking the temperature, pressure, and humidity in the labs when we're producing products.
Right. And sometimes, I think that's a great example, and I'm going to make an assumption here, but sometimes real-time data can be like an alarm, right? Like the temperature is too low, something needs to be fixed. Sometimes it's within parameters, but becomes useful later when you discover something in a trailing indicator or report and want to go back and see what was happening when that material was produced. Who was working on it? What was the temperature?
There's a question of was this product properly manufactured? We can say it wasn't a factor of the temperature, pressure, humidity in the room when it was done. That was all in spec. So the problem was after delivery or during deliveries.
Which brings us back to that previous slide. Extraordinary effort to support, and that could be resources in terms of storing that data, right? It can sometimes feel Several of us have probably built audit logging systems. That's a form of real-time data, right? Where you've got maybe a system with some kind of medical information in it. You need to implement some version of HIPAA, whatever the client decides is their standard. And so you're logging changes to fields, whatever technology you might have used. And that generates a whole lot of data that no one really uses until there's an audit or an incident. But it's there and it's necessary. But it's not trivial to set it up or store it or manage it. And you see that when you upgrade your system and suddenly you've got, a billion records of audit logging data and you're trying to figure out at what point do I still need that? Oh, forever. Data trends. So this is something that's kind of like trailing indicators, I think something that's familiar to us, but I want to talk a little bit about just the utility here, if it isn't obvious. So data trends allow you in many ways to look at information over time, and I think maybe even more importantly, compare different periods for the same information to see whether or not interventions that were made for whatever reason because of some other indicator or some change in policy or some change in products or services or staffing or suppliers or whatever, if that had some unexpected or intended effect on those comparable metrics. So comparing those information, not just seasonally, but potentially different people, different production lines, different suppliers, and so on over time. They will give you also a general indication of the overall direction over time. So, we've all seen like the 13-month trailing, or leading kind of average graphs that kind of show is it growing or is it shrinking. You're not just looking at it month by month. You're looking at a 13-period average maybe where it takes the last 13 months, the next 13 months, and the next 13 months and gives you something that's a bit more distributed. But it's really a way to trend and analyze the data in a more a smoother way, right? So it's not so jerky and jumpy. They can also obviously help you know whether or not the interventions that you selected actually made a difference. Very few of the interventions we make in business have an immediate effect. They often take several periods, whether it's weeks, days, months, quarters, or even years for those effects to be seen. And they also can be a very good complement to financial reporting. I was just in a business review for, at Step Out during Cage, sitting on a business review for a colleague of mine in a Vistage meeting. And she had several years of her data trends of information of how the business performed side by side. And there was a big dip in 2023. It's a very successful business, but they had this weird dip. And then we could go and we could look at the profit and loss and see what was happening in that period and see there was an investment made in infrastructure and that accounts for the dip. So it led to a conversation and exploration of other data that was available to us because it was really obvious when we looked at it year over year, something really weird happened in Q3 2023. The general curve was the same. You were growing and it was kind of the same shape, but then there was this oddball kind of variation. What's going on there? Is that a bad data or did some kind of event take place? And it's easy maybe to see that for some people, comparing periods in the P&L side by side. For other people, they want to see a graph and they want to be able to see the curve and then they want that to be a place where the conversation gets started. So some examples of data trends. We've been monitoring our warranty hours and what we call $0 per hour. So hours that are outside the budget on a fixed fee project. We have a way at Skeleton Key of saying if a project is, a fixed fee, we think it's going to take 200 hours. Once we're done recording 200 hours on it, the money is gone, even if there's another 50 hours for us to do. And we know when the dust settles, we're going to take the total dollars and divide them by 250, and now we know what each hour was really worth. But from a revenue recognition standpoint, we just go in and say the first 200 are regular hours, and then the next 50 are $0 per hour. And then we know we're kind of over budget now. Our scope tracker or burn down tells us that's going to happen way in advance. But the warranty one's a different kind of concern, right? That's estimate quality and other things might be coming up in terms of the fixed fee. But warranty means that we built something and an error slipped through testing and we have bad quality. And if you go to a colleague Valentine's session on quality is more than testing, we'll convince you that the earlier you fix your quality issues, the better, because they get very expensive downstream. So we're taking interventions to identify what were the warranty issues and what kinds of changes do we need way upstream in our development process to eliminate warranty. And the best way we can see whether that works is we look at our warranty over time, and then we look at our warranty later over time, and we see whether the interventions we implemented in January 2024 actually made a difference, sometime during the year. And all the different interventions we made when we adopt. So let's say you want to take those maps and put timelines below them to say what happened on this year. This is when we started EOS. This is when we hired Joe. This is when we fired Ben. This is when we started doing this approach to Agile. This is when we changed ERPs, and see whether or not those are affecting the data trends, not to excuse them, but to provide some clarity as to what might be behind those things. And whether or not you should or shouldn't do those. Again, for me, my favorite isn't always necessarily, it's really great if you do one and suddenly the numbers get better and you're like, we got to do that again, assuming we can come up with something equally good to do. More likely it's, we did this and the numbers went down. Is that an accident or was it on purpose? So that next time we make a decision like that, we should be prepared for the numbers going down. Great if we could mitigate that, but some things you can't. Changing your payroll provider or changing your accounting system. I mean, we saw last year we changed our billing system and it moved our accounts receivable about like 100 days. It was a huge backlog. Suddenly our accounts receivable went from like wherever it was to like twice that amount. A bunch of clients didn't get invoices for 2 months. They were all great about it. I was not so great about it, but it meant that, our cash went down. We had all these different things happening. It all started with us changing a billing system. Next thing you know, we had clients who didn't have information, cash flow problems in terms of managing payroll, blah, 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 all because of that. And someone who was like in the crosshairs on getting all those invoices out once the transition was done. Now I know in the future that means I won't not change accounting systems. It just means I'll go in with my eyes much wider open, thinking about what kinds of interventions I can do to potentially mitigate some of those issues. Maybe just notifying my customers or conserving cash ahead of that transition would be ways to mitigate some of the ancillary effects. We also do a lot of tracking at our company about our conversion ratios and sales. So we haven't had a lot of good activity tracking on like calls made and estimates submitted. That's something that we're starting to do now. But we have been looking at, for all the deals we have, how many of them do we win and what's the percentage and who does that percentage vary by a different person and why might it be different by different person? Why does Mark close 70-something% and Chad closes 15% and Rob closes 42%? What are they doing differently? Is it the client mix that they're getting? Is it the size of the projects they're getting? Is it the way and their bedside manner of handling those clients, et cetera, et cetera? And so often what it can lead to is a review, not necessarily of interventions you can make, but different types of practices that might vary across your development team or across your sales team. If you have a developer who's consistently planned, consistently utilized, has very high quality, is that replicable into other members of your team? Right? Unless you're comparing those people side by side and trying to isolate variables that you think might affect it, like the nature of the assignments they got, it would be really hard to know which ones have best practices or behaviors that you want to try to emulate or distill and turn into training for your team. So some comparisons. Both measure things over time, but real-time data obviously is focused on now. And in some cases it's focused on now in the interest of serving analysis later. But it's very much attuned to the moment by moment. Data trends are really more focused over longer periods of time, often for comparison's sake. Real-time data is more, I think, reflexive. If you're going to respond to real-time data in real time, it's because something is down or something is going sideways. Or you're going to be logging that data for potential future analysis or comparison, like in the example of the pharmaceuticals or, maybe a HIPAA violation or something like that. Data trends, they're going to allow you to consider changes, but certainly in a much calmer way. They're really more about thoughtful review, like I said, of things like performance that varies across different resources, or suppliers or employees, possibly different best practices that you could implement, or other kinds of investments or changes and interventions you made and whether or not they had intended impacts that you couldn't necessarily see in real time. Again, both improve your prediction skills. Real-time data and experimenting that will start to help you learn which types of things are worth monitoring in real times and which ones just generate a bunch of log data that is really useless, and just a kind of a monkey on your back. And data trends teach us to look at the big picture and maybe not get swept up with what's happening right now. I love showing my team, because we're open book, especially the new members of our team. We'll be looking at our monthly results, which we obviously will only do quarterly pretty soon. And we'll open up all the results from 2009 to today. And so if we have a month that's not so good, I'll be like, it's okay. Like, there's a month that was no good. There was a month that was good. There was 4 that year. And I can show them, like, we have been through that before. It's okay. We survived. Profit is not as important as cash. Let's make sure we have cash. We can survive some lack of profit. Sometimes you have it on purpose because you invest. When we have our staff conference, I can predict this September, we're going to lose money. Because we're going to take everybody offline for 3 days. We're going to fly people in. We're going to have hotel rooms. We're going to go out to dinner. 20, 25 people doing that. It's not a very successful month, but it's a very valuable investment. We do it every year, knowing every year that month is going to be a sinker. So both of these help you predict that, but they predict it in different ways. So both are valuable. One is conditions as they unfold. The other one is conditions in arrears. And again, like trailing indicators, can lead to an analysis loop that you need to validate, not just kind of reflexively respond to. You get a long-term view with data trends. You get a short-term view with real-time data. Of course, real-time data can also serve a long-term analysis if it's necessary, if you're willing to store that information. And obviously, combining both types, right? Combining all four types can really be valuable, but it requires experimentation. If anything, and that may have been in that first slide or the second slide or not, experimentation is the key question here. It is not just to do the easy sub-summary parts and send out those standard canned reports and think that's good enough. It's the willingness to kind of look at those metrics and determine whether they are really useful to anybody. And by useful, I define as they help you improve the organization, not just feel good about what you've done. That's great. But whether or not they're actually helping the company advance in whatever its mission is, whether it's to make more money, whether it's to bring more people into housing, whether it's to get packages delivered quicker. If you're not able to use this to improve the outcomes, then you shouldn't be tracking any of it all. Let's take this down more local to individual performance and productivity. And I'm going to speed this up so we have at least 10, 15 minutes to chat. So like I mentioned before, we were a great game company, open book management. We started that in 2009. Somewhere in around 2019, we started reading some books by Patrick Lencioni, and we adopted The Advantage as sort of a model to run our leadership team. And eventually we evolved into the entrepreneurial operating system Traction. And the reason I bring these up, since we're still learning how to run the business, is they all had a lot of things in common in that they all talk about metrics, right? Every business book at some point probably talks about metrics. In the great game of business, there's a lot of, they use a lot of game analogies. You know, can't go out and play baseball if you don't know and teach the rules of baseball, follow the action and keep score, and give everyone a reason to care. Have skin in the game, stake in the outcome, right? Why else would people go play? They wouldn't know where to throw it, and they wouldn't be trying to win. But winning is different for different people. A great example in that book is the person who's a machine operator, and the way that they could move the needle for the organization when they were in these dire straits at the beginning of their origin story was to paint the floor white around her machine so she could see every washer or spare part that fell on the floor around her machine, to pick it up so they would reduce waste. This wasn't a Six Sigma lean thing. This was a line worker on a piece of machinery that needed to figure out what they could do personally to make a difference. And it turned out they needed just a can of white paint. But that metric, 0 parts dropped, reduced costs in their department and added to the overall effort that the company was making to be profitable again. The truth about employee engagement gets into a story about a retired executive who helps a pizzeria, a little Italian restaurant, come back. And he does that in part by helping each individual member of the team come up with a metric that they can control, that matters to them, that actually drives toward the right direction. And then Traction takes that and jumps it into steroids in terms of departmental metrics. So I'm going to skip through these really quickly. You can read these when you download the slides. I think my slide deck is more or less the same, and I'll upload the final version after today. But this is an example of a quote, you know, get people involved in helping define the metrics that matter. It's not the same metric for every person. I've got one kid who never misses assignments. That missing assignment metric is useless to him. But there is another metric that was useful to him. You know, it had to do with practicing his drums or something like that. Or maybe someone else, it was about, you know, getting to bed on time or spending less time on his phone. Because in the end result, we had to determine what was affecting his performance as a student. And it wasn't missing his assignments, it was something else. In fact, I have one son who, he finished all his tests quick. He was proud of coming home and saying, yeah, I was done with my test 45 minutes in. Everyone else was done. I was the first one to walk up, and then he would get a lower score. And I was like, dude, how about be the last guy to hand in your test for a quarter, and let's see what happens. And it made a difference. His grades went up. He actually ended up being like in that golden K or whatever they call it, because he had a really good grade point average. But it was only because he stopped rushing his work, which is, of course, what his teachers told us they were seeing him do as well, is that he was smart, but he didn't check his work, so he made silly mistakes. But again, different metrics, different kids. There's 4 of them. They all have different strengths and weaknesses. In Lencioni's book, he talks about the same thing. Give them something of their own choosing. My favorite example there was the grumpy guy at the takeout window who had 2 metrics. One was accuracy of his orders and smiles that he got from his customers. And he literally had a piece of paper that he was writing. And there was even a little bit in there where he's like, well, shouldn't I put this somewhere or shouldn't someone else count them? I'm like, no, you own the metric. I'm going to trust you're going to be ethical. I don't care how you get them to smile. You can tell jokes. You can compliment them on what they're wearing. You can tell them that's a great choice from the menu. Count the smiles, right? And then the other one was make sure that 0 orders come back incorrect. So it's your job to make sure that whatever you got from the kitchen is what they actually ordered and matches the ticket. Because you're the last person who's going to hand it to them. They're not going to know it's someone else's fault. They're going to think it's yours. And he was grumpy and didn't want to do it, but it made a difference. Someone else there had something to do with table turns. Someone else there had to do with tips. I mean, they all had different metrics, but they were all about getting this ailing restaurant up off the ground. He talks about it more broadly in other ways throughout the whole table group, which is their organization. And then the EOS talks about the same thing. You know, everyone has a number in our organization. The obvious ones for developers are often, you know, hours billed or utilization. But for one of our teammates, just like one of my sons, he's great. Every week, he finds a way to get the work done. Whether the work was planned or not, he gets his hours in and he does good quality work. But he doesn't necessarily adopt new techniques or learn new features. So we don't need him to have an hours, intervention. We need him to have a training and learning intervention. Just different for different people. So participation matters. You got to get your people involved. If they help define it, they will feel like they own it. My kids were involved in those conversations. It wasn't just you need to do this. It was what do you think could make a difference here? And then sit there quietly while they struggle and squirm trying to figure out what it might be. Simple is better. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You could come up with really simple things like counting things or measuring simple things like satisfaction or quality or timeliness. You don't have to reinvent the wheel and come up with some exotic metric for an individual person. Most of the things are pretty standard. Finally, I won't bore you with this part too much. And again, we're running long on time, so I apologize. I've gone a little bit more wordy. This is a really hard book. Okay, I'm just going to say it. It's called How to Measure Anything by a guy named Douglas Hubbard. It's a terribly challenging audiobook to listen to just because of the narration and the voice. I found it very hard, but you can find it online. You can find it on Kindle, I think. I think I even found a PDF somewhere. I've got a physical copy. But it has some really important points about measuring. And it's not a new book. It's been around. I think it's in its 3rd edition. He basically makes the point that management cares about measurement. Perfect certainty is not realistic in measurement. And there are always methods to measure everything. So he makes the point that we misunderstand what measurement really is. I think we're all numbers and data people, right? For us, most measurements are really precise and they're just adding up and summarizing or evaluating or dividing things. But his point is that measurement, if you actually look at scientifically, is a very imperfect science, right? Numbers are nice and precise, but most numbers are not that precise. Most measurements are not precise. It's about reducing uncertainty and getting closer. If anyone ever took differential calculus, you know what I mean. You know, I can go halfway to the wall, halfway to the wall, halfway to the wall. I'll never really get to the wall, but I'm more or less at the wall, right? Good enough. And that's really my version of that. It's about understanding that the concept is reduction of uncertainty, what you're actually measuring, and the various methods that are available. He gets into ways of describing how measurement can be made less of a tangible and more practical. He talks about the value of different kinds of information and focusing on ones that have a value that's high versus a value that's near 0. So there's a lot of, I'd say, mathematical theory involved in what he's talking about to help you kind of get into the space where you understand what's possible to measure. And then he gets into very specific, detailed, specific examples of how to measure things that are presumably intangible, like customer satisfaction. We've all got Net Promoter Score and other kinds of things, but how do you measure quality? How do you measure customer satisfaction? How do you measure the effectiveness of a marketing campaign in a precise way? And he gets into some really other examples that are very challenging and difficult that he has lots of case studies. A former member of our community, Jonathan Stark, who many of you may have heard of, who talks a lot about selling on value, brings this up as one of his favorite books. It's what led me to the book in the first place, because it helped me, bless you, understand, one of the best ways to help a client or a business decision maker understand whether it's worthwhile investing in what we do is to help them see the value of what we're going to do. What if the value is I want my department to be more efficient? Well, how do you define what more efficient is? Is it really the literal individual metrics for the people, or is it something more fuzzy? And we need to figure out how to communicate with those decision makers about measuring value, not just to increase potentially the value of our services and our fees, but also to make sure that it's worth doing what they want us to do in the first place. I, for one, have built a solution over the years that the client wanted, that turned out to not really make much of a difference in their organization. Still got paid, but I didn't feel so good about it. And it wasn't like I knew that going in. I just didn't ask them the questions I should have to make sure that it was a worthwhile investment. That's my metric. I can't make my wife happy, but I can do things that might influence that. That's that tangential one, like the temperature. Like I can do something over here that will probably reduce the likelihood that she'll be unhappy, but other things, there's too many variables, right? It's a really complicated equation. My kids are the most complicated piece of that equation, right? I can be doing everything right, and then one of them can come in and just take it all down. But my point is that we all have metrics already. Many of them are super intangible, like that one. I bet many of you have something similar. And you don't have complete control of it, but you can influence it. And so I think for me, I'm trying to figure out this one still. Sources and resources, those 3 books are my best. Another one here is this guy named Bernard Marr. He's got a great website. It's obviously very much positioned to help him promote himself as well, but he talks about big data. He talks about KPIs. He wrote Key Performance Indicators for Dummies. He's now talking about AI, of course. But he's got some really good analysis and good ideas. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I'll double check this, but I may on the speaker's notes have some additional resources and resources to share as well. With that, I'll say thank you and open the floor up for sharing of stories or questions. Yes.
How do you prevent, this is probably our biggest problem, is garbage in, garbage out, right? If you're trying to collect data that human beings are putting in, my prime case just dealt with last week, is defects, right? Okay, I got 8 teams using your app to record defects. One team had 0 defects. Well, it's because they weren't using the app.
Right.
Right.
So I think that data trending and that comparison, well, it really isn't a data trend. Like any report you could do that could compare, like it sounds you did, the same values from different teams where you see something that is definitely different. There's one of 2 things that's probably happening. They've figured out how to do it better, but they're not putting the data and capturing it correctly, right? So it sounds like you've identified it, but the key thing I think is predicting up front. This is a distributed solution that's trying to measure something that's really important to the business. We probably should see similar results from all the teams. Let's predict that having that comparison from the very beginning would be useful so we could either identify the best practice early or so we could identify non-compliance early.
Yeah.
So that's a lesson you can take into the other solutions that you might. Yes, sir.
You think there's sort of a, it's hard to phrase, but do you think there's like sometimes implementing a system for tracking a new metric creates a potential other problem in that it's creating drag on another kind of performance, maybe if you're making people log their time with some extra data, for example, that you can use that may cost them more time and may then, so sometimes when you implement a metric, do you have to like mark that in your timeline and then keep track of whether that is actually collecting that metric is affecting your overall, like another metric?
Yep, no, I hear what you're saying. So yes, I think there's a couple ways to address that. We did something similar to that. I think it was April or May of 2022, where we switched our time tracking from Autotask, which was the PSA tool we had used with our IT group. So it was what everybody was using. We went back to using Tempo, Jira. And when we did that, we decided to change the requirements for time entry so that people would stop entering all their time and just enter time on client work. So if they're working on a client, I wanted to know if they had a warranty or an error or mistake, but we said, no more tracking all of it, just track the time that matters. And the correlated change we made was, and because they were also learning all these new time entry tools, so there was this friction they were going to encounter. The other thing that we did to kind of counterbalance that was we said, no more describing your time entries. The time entries are associated with the issue. The time entry description is the issue name. And the exceptions should be exceptions, right? So we started monitoring exceptions. We sort of changed the rules and took something away while we made it. We kind of did a little trade-off, add some complexity and create some simplicity. And at the same time, we started monitoring how many exceptions there were for the time entries. Were people actually adopting the new practice? We had 2 people who just couldn't stop the habit. So they were not only using the new system, which created friction for them, they were entering fewer time entries. Great, they got that, but they were still describing every single one. So their time entry slowed down. They started feeling like the pain of the new system. Everybody else, though, was like super excited. They just let the time entries describe themselves. So we had to monitor to see who was actually doing custom entries. So I think you can't always, but I think you can do trade-offs. But my favorite answer to that question is, don't build the system. If you think you need to track something, grab a piece of paper, throw a whiteboard at everybody's desk. It's much less expensive to buy 20 whiteboards than it is to spend money building a system. or to buy 20 pads of paper, and start capturing that new information in a non-digital way for just a brief period of time to see if it's actually going to make the difference that you want. Many of our metrics started out on whiteboards. You know, when we were all in an office together, that was a little easier. When we were semi-virtual, we had to take a picture of the whiteboard each day or have someone else fill the information in. Eventually, we started putting those into Google Sheets to kind of share it. Like, spreadsheets are great. We all replace them all the time, but they are so quick and easy to use if you want to do something like that really quickly. They don't have validation. They don't have all the other features you might want without programming. But they can be a less expensive intervention if you want to start doing something and to effectively test it, right? Sort of like Clarence was saying, it's an agile way to test and validate an idea before you invest in it. It's a prototype of what you want. So maybe the short answer is prototype it, don't build it. See if it's worth doing. Then when you do it, see what you can do in terms of trade-offs and monitoring to ensure that it's done as leanly, as efficiently as you can. You're right, it's not necessarily easy. You often don't know until after you do it that you introduced a new problem. So,
Well, along these lines, in terms of getting the data to get these analyses, you have ways of motivating people or automating or having triggers so that you automatically capture the data, or ways of motivating people to enter the data correctly, or even to enter it at all.
yeah, I mean, you're talking about, I think, user experience in many ways. Right? I know one company here who they have instituted a timer is always running model in their development team. So the minute someone comes in, they hit a timer, and it's on some activity. Maybe it's getting coffee, right? And then they hit another, they end that timer and another timer starts, and now it's tracking that they're in a meeting. And then they hit that and they start another one, and it's now they're working on the project. And so their approach to it is, we don't make you enter the discrete time entries. We just make you enter or click a button when there's a transition. Other companies, we create each one from scratch. And so we end up with a bunch of white space that's not counted for. So I don't know that there's one way to do that correctly. I think a lot of it comes down to culture, and whether or not the tools you have will accommodate a way to make that have less friction. Do you have an example of a successful way that you've done that you would recommend?
I try to use the database as the trigger points and really work with them clearly. What makes a difference in your process to collect the data? That try to automate it as much as possible. That's my solution.
Automating it, make it simple, and then if it comes to it, make it part of the performance evaluation. Bonus them on it.
Yep.
We've been operating under the EOS since 2015, and the way we solve that particular problem is in the weekly level 10 meetings, or just a weekly meeting, we call it a pulse, like a heartbeat. And so those leading indicators are brought, and if those are if those are not meeting expectations, whatever else, it becomes an issue. And if it's a hot issue, we deal with it that day. And the goal is to get to the root cause of that issue. What is that? Well, my cat died, or my chair is uncomfortable, or whatever the actual root issue is of that particular issue. Then we produce a solution that is timed for the next week to be solved. And if it's solved, it's great. We make it go away forever. And if it's not, it just becomes another issue that has to we didn't find the root. We got to dive back into it. So that weekly pulse for us is what solves it, so that you can get to the root issues that are on fire. And it's a more organic way to be with the people, especially if they've chosen their metric and they have buy-in. You get a lot more response. At least that's what we've experienced.
Right. And interestingly, we've been doing hours for the longest time, and our production level 10s have from the team, from the grassroots, have been asking for. They don't want hours anymore. They just want to know how much dollars that team or that person generated that day. And if it's lower, why, right? It could be that they're working outside an estimate and they're over budget. It could be that they're doing warranty work. It could be that they got sucked into prepping for an Engage presentation, right? Whatever their particular reason is. But they've asked for those metrics to be improved. So that's just another issue. We're like, okay, well, people are productive, but the data they're getting isn't telling them what they want to know, which is this affecting the bottom line of the company? So they've actually asked for improved metrics. And that's a form of that personal metric. Like, obviously, we're measuring their performance as developers so we could know on a periodic basis, like Mike says, whether they're performing well, but so we could take interventions. But they wanted to know a more meaningful version of that same metric, whether or not they were contributing to the bottom line. So even if they were really busy, were they busy on the right kind of stuff? And if they weren't, even if it wasn't their fault, what could they do about it? They could be the person who didn't build the system, but they just happened to be the one who caught the warranty work, right? And so it's not their fault, but they want to get out of that warranty situation as soon as possible. Are they the right person to work on the warranty work? Maybe there's someone who can solve it quicker.
We're a recent EOS company as well, and I was curious, were you doing scorecarding before y'all got on EOS? If you were, are you doing it differently?
Yes and yes. We have been doing scorecards of some kind since we became open book in 2009. And technically, I guess we were doing them out of our time tracking system in FileMaker since 2004. But the scorecards really began for us in 2009, and they have evolved dramatically as we've adopted EOS. And my favorite thing is the implementer said to us for EOS, these will be not so good for the first 6 months. You should expect that half the metrics you come up with are going to be useless, and you want to get as few metrics that are useful as possible. And so I keep reminding my team, like, perfect, let's not let perfect be the enemy of good, but let's be willing to toss a metric if a month or two in, it's clear that it's not changing behavior. It's not giving us what we need. It's just another number to report, out the door.